Welcome back to Just Talking. We have a great show for you today. We have a great guest here to talk to, and that's Bill Kroyer, who is the animation director. And Bill, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be with you.
Well, Bill, let's start off. How did you get involved in animation? Where did it all start?
I always loved to draw when I was a kid. I actually grew up in Chicago. My dad was a factory worker. No one in my neighborhood was an artist. He didn't know any artists. He didn't think you could make your living drawing. So they never let me take art classes. But I ended up I was on the school paper. I went to Lane Tech. I was the cartoonist. I got a scholarship to Northwestern. I went to Northwestern, majored in journalism because they at least knew writers made livings writing. And then when I was doing that, I had to make a commercial for an advertising class, and I decided instead of shooting a commercial live, I would do what I was doing on the paper. I'd do a cartoon. So I bought a book on how to do an animated film, and I found out you had to draw one drawing and then take a picture and do another drawing and take a picture. And I did that. And I made this little tiny 16 millimeter film of a little snake that came up into frame and turned around and winked at the camera. And I sent that 16 millimeter film off to the drugstore, and 2 days later it came back, and I put it on the projector and projected it. And when that little snake turned around and winked at me, I felt like God, like I had created a life. I'd created life. And from that instant on, I never thought of doing anything else with my life but be in animation. And I didn't. I taught myself how to animate in Chicago. Eventually, ironically, Chuck Jones, the greatest animator in the world, came to Chicago Film Festival, and I dragged my projector to his hotel room and I said, "Hey, I'm an animator. Why don't you look at one of my films?" Chuck being like such a wonderful guy, he said, "Yeah, right, come on in." And he looked at it and he said, "You did this, you're like self-taught." And I went, "Yeah." And he says, "I just think you have talent. I think you could be an animator. I think you should move to LA." So that I said to my mom, "I got to move to LA." And I got in my van and I drove out to LA, and that's how I got started.
So when you got to LA, what was your first job as an animator? How did that come about?
Well, of course, I went to see Chuck right away because he was the only person I knew. And I said, "Hey, remember me from Chicago?" And he went, "Hey, good luck." And I went, "Good luck.
I'm here.
You can hire me." And he went, "No, I'm not doing anything right now." And so he sent me on this, he gave me names, and I went to every single studio in LA and got rejected everywhere because I really was lousy. I was, self-taught. I went to Disney. I had an interview at Disney. And of course, they told me, "Come back when you have an art school education," which I didn't. And then just as I was about to quit and leave and give up, I got a call from one of the studios, and they said, "Would you like to come in and would you come in and do in-betweens?" And they said, "How cheap will you work?" They actually said that. I said, "I'll work for anything." And so I went in and I earned just below the minimum wage to start doing in-betweens. And that was how my career started. And again, by blessed luck, the animation director of this small commercial studio happened to be one of the greatest animation teachers in the world, Frank Terry, who eventually had up Cal Arts, the famous Disney school. And for 2 years, I worked my way up the ladder from a very bottom in-betweener to a lead animator at that studio. And that's how I got my start. And then from there, then after 2 years, I submitted my reel to Disney, and then I got into Disney. And that's when my career really took off.
What was your first project at Disney?
They put me on Pete's Dragon because Pete's
Really?
Dragon was in a crunch. They were trying to finish it. They had all hands on deck. So even though I was hired into the training program to be the elite, to be the animator, they needed everybody that could draw well to go on Pete's Dragon. So that's what I did. So, as a matter of fact, I actually have a Pete's Dragon cell right there on the wall, right there. That's one of the cells of the drawings that I did on Pete's Dragon. In those days, of course, we drew on paper, and then the paper was traced and people painted the back and made an animation celluloid. And so that's what I did. And then after Pete's Dragon, I worked on the small one, which was a short film we did about a Christmas film. And then after that, I went on to the Fox and the Hound, which was the big film at that time.
Another wonderful film I really loved is the movie Tron. And maybe if I could get a little backstory, I believe you worked on that film. How did that come about?
Well, when I was finishing Fox and Hound, a young animator talked his way through the gates at Disney and actually came into our room and pitched us to quit Disney and work for him. It was a guy named Steve Lisberger. And he had sold a project called Animal Olympics to NBC. It was going to be a cartoon about the Olympics with animals. And he had just moved here from Boston and he set up a studio and I was the only and I kind of sparked to him, because The Black Cauldron was the next movie coming up and I just thought it was a terrible looking movie and I was not excited about it. So I left Disney and I went to work for Steve and he made me his animation director. We made this movie called Animal Olympics, which was a lot of fun to make. And toward the end of Animal Olympics, Steve came up with this idea for a movie about a computer guy gets sucked into one of his own computer games. And we started developing that. I did all the storyboarding for that. And lo and behold, who did we sell it to? We sold it back to Disney. So I went right back to Disney as the animation director on Tron. And myself and Jerry Reese, who's the only Disney guy I could talk into joining us, we storyboarded the whole film and then we became the animators. And it was the most exciting thing to do because if you at that time in 1980, computer animation was absolutely brand new. No one had ever done anything like it. And so every day you would go into work and you'd be doing something no one in the world had ever done. And we created the 70 millimeter computer animation on Tron, and every single step of it was a story.
It's just amazing that film. It just still holds up today on what you guys accomplished. And I guess that's my question is, were you guys because it was never done before, was there any timeline of getting it done or because how do you go about knowing how long it's going to take once you get started?
But you don't, it's like if you ever have heard that expression, jumping off a cliff and building your wings on the way down, that was Tron. When we sold Tron to Disney, none of the imagery we promised them had ever been made or at that moment could be made. We literally, working with these four computer companies around America, had to create the software and create the imagery and invent it as we went. And it was really pretty phenomenal. I mean, it was so primitive, the way we did it, that I don't think kids today could even relate to it. In 1970, or think about it, there was no animation software. People were just beginning to write software that could build models and color models and photograph models, but nobody had anything that could move a model and make it turn. And so you literally had to hand write where the light cycle would be on every one of the 24 frames of the 1 second of film that you were filming. I mean, it was just the you know the diagrams you had to make, and it was really kind of an astounding accomplishment that we did it.
I remember seeing at the end credits there were like a lot of Asian names. Were things shot done in Asia, or how did that come
Oh,
about?
that's one of the you stumbled upon.
Yeah.
Those credits were for these people in Taiwan that hand painted the black codalith cells that were used on the live action portion of Tron. There was 18 minutes of computer animation, and me and Jerry did every single frame of that ourselves. No assistants, no one else. But the rest of the movie, if you recall, had live action actors in outfits, right? And the way that was done was in a crazy method that has never been done before or since. They had the actors wearing black and white outfits and they shot them on a black and white stage. And after they shot the film, they developed each frame into an 11 by 17 codalith. And then they made a positive and a negative of that codalith. And then they proceeded to create mats. In other words, they took black paint and painted out what they didn't want to have lit. They put them on a table, they shined a light through the back of them, and they photographed that. So to photograph a scene where a character would have five different illuminated colors, and then he'd be on a background with five more colors, you'd have to have 10 passes under camera with 10 different combinations of positive and negative codaliths. And these poor people in Taiwan had to sit and just paint black paint to paint out the areas that weren't supposed to be exposed to light. They weren't even looking at real photos. It was the most boring job you could possibly have. And that's what they did for 2 years. And they did something like 200,000 hand-painted codoliths to make Tron.
Hey, it's me, Flynn! Flynn! Yeah, greetings, program!
It must have been amazing when it gets towards the end of the process when it's coming together because, like you said, in the beginning stages, sort of rough, but how was it towards the end of the process?
All movies are crazy at the end. You're always rushing to get done. Tron was, the only studio in town that it could have made Tron was Disney because it was the only real animation studio in Hollywood at the time. And if you had said to Fox or MGM, we need to order 80,000 more codaliths, they'd go, 80,000 codaliths. Are you out of your mind? But Disney, when they're making an animated film, they're making 100,000 cells. So to them, it was like, yeah, we understand. So this craziness of Tron, it ended up being a film that no one really understood what they were looking at. When our visual effects supervisor, Richard Taylor, presented the film at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences for Oscar consideration for Best Achievement in Visual Effects, he showed it to the world's greatest visual effects artists. And when he was done with his presentation, there was not one question, not one. Because these people had never seen anything like this. They didn't know what to ask. And they also thought that we had cheated because we'd used a computer in some way that they had never heard of.
Hmm.
So it was kind of a remarkable moment, But I will say this, Tron enjoys one of those very rare things in film history where if you see one frame of Tron, you know it's Tron.
Oh.
You don't mistake it for any other movie.
Sounds good.
How was it for you and Steve Lisberger when you sat in the theater and watched the final product when it was shown?
Well, it was great, but I think it was even, for me, the more amazing moments were the very first images we saw.
Hmm.
Because remember, you couldn't watch an object move on a screen in those days. There was no software or technology to allow the computer to move a thing fast enough so you could watch it on a screen. So the only way we could watch our animation was to create all the files for the animation. Then the computer companies could do a vector version of it, but they'd have to do it on a film recorder. They'd have to do it in 70 millimeter.
Hmm.
And so the very, very first time we would see our animation would be in the sound stage, looking at a gigantic 70 millimeter projection that was 50 feet wide. And you'd stand there and look at this massive screen with this computer animation, the light cycles rushing through the tunnels, and you couldn't believe it. I mean, nobody had ever seen anything like it. And yeah, it was a really big moment.
Pick me up in an hour! Thanks! Greetings, program!
Well, I gave that 4 stars back then. I give it 4 stars back now. Just a great film.
Well,
So you created all this groundbreaking technology. After what happened after Tron? Did you guys think of doing something similar to that, or what ended when Tron was done?
well, of course, Disney decided since the movie didn't do as well at the box office. It's become a legend since then. But it was a tough summer. You had Blade Runner and E.T. and Star Trek. It was one of the greatest summers in history for science fiction. So the movie didn't do blockbuster status, and Disney decided they didn't want to do computer stuff anymore. As a matter of fact, John Lasseter, who of course founded Pixar, used to sit behind me and watch me work, and that's where he got excited about computer animation. And he actually talked Disney into doing one test with a animated character in a computer background. And they did that little test, and Disney looked at it and they said to him, well, John, we've seen this test. We've decided we don't want to go this way. So I guess we don't need you anymore. And they fired John Lasseter.
Wow.
Basically, several billion dollars in entertainment walks out the door, and goes to Pixar. And of course, Litzberger, he couldn't get anybody to do the same kind of movie again. He did a couple other live action movies that
Mhm.
didn't do well. Uh, I wanted to stay in the computer business because I was so excited by doing groundbreaking work every day. And finally, after a couple of years of doing little tiny projects, I stumbled into John Whitney and Gary Demos. Actually, I didn't stumble into them. They were two guys that started their own company. We did. We started with we did the world's very first human figure animation on a computer in 1983.
Mhm.
And it was kind of funny. It was called Block Woman. It was just a vector girl made of blocks, and I animated her uh, to a Mick Jagger song. And it became the rage. Like everybody would come in, look at this. Oh, it's amazing. It's a human figure dancing to a Mick Jagger song. And guess who saw it? Mick Jagger. And he hired us to do his next video. So we did this Mick Jagger video called Hard Woman with Mick dancing with this vector girl. And it was completely groundbreaking because it did all these things that no one had ever done. We filmed Mick on a green screen, but instead of compositing him with video techniques, we actually scanned him digitally, which had never been done before. And he was composited digitally with the animation, which had never been done before. And he was synchronized with a computer character, which had never been done before. And we texture mapped the buildings with paintings, which had never been done before. So this one little video had all of these groundbreaking, it's called Hard Woman, if you ever get a chance to look it up. And it was really quite a moment. Unfortunately, this was on Mick's own single album. It wasn't a Rolling Stones record. And so it played on, on MTV for a short time, and then it kind of went into the vapor. But what it did, of course, was, again, break new ground as far as like, computer animated imagery.
Well, one, you're talking about Oscar nominated movies, is that I did see this technological threat that I believe you were put together. The characters that are hand drawn, dealing with it's really a great short.
Well, Digital Productions, as I just said, was making these, we did the opening titles for Labyrinth, the David Bowie, Jim Henson thing, animated that owl, and he was the very, very first photoreal animal ever done in computer animation. I won't go into how complicated that was. But right after that, Digital Productions was purchased. John and Gary were in debt. This other company bought their debt. They kicked them out. They brought in new management. Within a very short time, the company was out of business, and I'm back on the street with everybody else. And a bunch of people started their own small studios, and that's what I did. My wife and I started our own little company, Kroyer Films. And I had always had this frustration being a Disney trained animator that with my pencil, I could create any kind of sophisticated, subtle facial expression, any kind of sophisticated, subtle movement I wanted. With the computer, I still had limitations. A computer could do some things that were amazing. It could animate objects, geometric objects, but it couldn't do organic things. And so I had the idea, why can't I do both? Why can't I find a technique to combine both of these? So that's why I hired this friend of mine, Tim Heidman, to write software to take computer animated objects and convert them into line drawings. And then those line drawings I could augment with hand animation, and they could all go through the regular process of being Xeroxed and painted in a traditional way. And that way I could combine computer animated motion with hand animated motion. And that was my idea. We actually sold a television series to do that. And then that series, before we could even go into production, was canceled. So I'm sitting there in my office with one computer, with the one set of software, and no one knew about this process. And I said, let's make a sample film so we can show the world. And with the last tiny bit of our savings, we made Technological Threat. And that, of course, got an Oscar nomination and became pretty famous, and that launched our career at Kroyer Films.
Once again, it's absolutely excellent animated short. The other thing was, and then you did your first feature, Fern Gully. How was that taking on now a full feature film as a director?
Well, after Technological Threat, of course, our studio took off. We started making short films, and we did a lot of movie titles, for Disney and Warner. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, Return of the Pink Panther. We did a lot of big movie titles, and we did other projects for Disney. We did an Epcot film called The Making of Me. So we were the only small commercial studio in Hollywood that was not Disney, that was completely staffed by ex-Disney people doing Disney quality. And that's when these two Australian guys came to town. They had just done Crocodile Dundee. They were very hot. They had this idea for an animated film. They came to Hollywood, and they went to Disney and said, we want to make this film. And Disney said, we don't do outside projects. And by looking around, they landed at us and they said, well, you guys do Disney quality. Why don't you do a feature? And I said, well, I have like 14 employees, I don't, you need like 250 people to do a feature. And they went, well, staff up. They thought it was as simple as like hiring, like a live action crew. But anyway, look, people aren't going to walk in your door and offer you $20 million to make a movie every day. So we said yes. And that's how Fern Gully got started. And that became the 2-year odyssey of building a studio while making a movie that was Fern Gully. And it was a great experience. We had the most wonderful artists come to us, went to Australia, did research on the rainforest, made the decision to put everything in the movie that was real flora, real fauna, because we wanted to show the magic of reality, of the beauty of a rainforest and why you should save it. And we made Fern Gully, and it was a great experience.
How was it working with Rob Williams since he had to work with the voice actors as well?
We were the first ones to use him in animation, and he was, as you can imagine, absolutely spectacular. He was, a wonderful guy off screen. But as far as getting in the recording booth, if there was any problem with him, he was too brilliant for us. Like he would read our script and he would look at the storyboards and he'd immediately get the scene. He'd totally understand the scene and he'd do the line. And then he'd start riffing on his own ideas and he'd start coming up with his own, and every one of them was great. And now I'm sitting there, I gotta choose now. What do I have? There's like
Yeah,
50
that's true.
great lines. I'm supposed to choose one line. But we did that and he was wonderful. He loved the project and he did such a great job.
And it's going back to Tron with Tron Legacy, and I think there's a new Tron. Were you ever asked to come on board to those films at
Oh,
all?
no, 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 I was not. No one was. I mean, even Steve Lisberger, the director, has
Yeah.
nothing to do with the production. They sort of show him the script, and he did make a guest appearance in the first, but he's had very little to do really with them.
NCOM's board moved to seize control from Flynn's partner Alan Bradley.
At least they keep him in touch, so that's good. And I'm still in touch with Steve, very creative guy, still lives in Santa Monica, and he kind of got out of the movie business other than keeping in touch on those Tron sequels. He does his own woodworking now. He's got a big woodworking shop and he enjoys doing that.
Work.
And I would think since the early days, when you were at Disney, you probably haven't seen some of those past animators that worked on some of the later classic ones like Robin Hood or 101 Dalmatians, or
Well,
not.
look, when I started in the industry, you got to realize it was the days of hand drawing,
Yeah.
right? And also, it wasn't like the animation industry in the 70s was not really booming. So all of us that came into the business then, we just got into it because we loved it. We just truly loved the art. And there was kind of a purity to that. And all of my contemporaries at that time, who I became close friends with and remained friends all these years, over the decades, they emerged as being the top people in the industry. So, everybody you can name, like, Ron Clements and John Musker and Pete Docter and Tim Burton, and these are all the guys that were hanging out. We were hanging out together. They'd come to my house for the Christmas party every year. And, it just became, I'm proud to say I'm still friends with all these folks.
Well, let's talk about you presently. Are you any works that we can see? Are you working on any other films or
Well, as a matter of fact, my autobiography is coming out in February. I've written
Hey,
a book where you can read about all these stories and
that's
all of
great.
the things behind it. And that book is called Mr. In Between: My Life in the Middle of the Animation Revolution. Because by coincidence, my career happened to exactly span the greatest transformative time in the industry. When I started, like I said, we were drawing on paper at an animation desk exactly like that.
Wow.
Matter of fact, that's a real Disney animation desk. That desk was used on Pinocchio and every subsequent movie. And you'd sit at that desk and you would draw on paper on pegs, and that's how you did animation. And that had not changed. When I started at Disney in 1975 or 77, a Snow White animator from 1939 could have sat down at the desk and gone right to work with no training whatsoever. It had literally not changed at all in 50 years. Then, in the next 25 years, it changed completely to the point where no one uses pencils anymore. So anyway, that happened to be my career. So my book is my personal journey through not only every single stage of that evolution, but also all the people that made it. Because I happened to, like as I said, I happen to know everybody, and I was there for all these things that happened. And so I think it's a fun book. I hope that people will consider it. I'll also have a terrific website that's going to go with that, mysteryinbetween.org. And that will open up when the book opens, and they'll have a lot of film clips on there of things in the book and everything. And if you want to have a really fun way to learn about the history of animation without weeding through volumes and volumes of book, I really think that my book will take you on that journey in a very entertaining way.
All right. Well, I will definitely pick that up, and I encourage everybody else. Well, boy, that half hour went by really quick. I want to thank Bill Kroyer for coming on down, and we'll definitely check out your book and all the animation work. You just do a wonderful job, and thank you so much for talking to us today.
Nice to talk to you, Jason. Thanks for having me on.